Welcome to another episode of Talking Cubs. I'm your host, Ryan Davis, and I'll be joined in a moment by my co-host, Sean Sears. Today we are talking about some Brewers news, well, sort of news, unfortunate stuff for the Cubs. It sounds like they're close to adding a guy that maybe the Cubs could really use if they weren't absolutely dead broke and without any sort of money at all. Sean, what do you think? Is Craig Kimbrel a guy that maybe the Cubs should be digging through the couch cushions to try and sign rather than letting the Brewers court him at this point?
Yes, 100%. They should have signed him 3 months
Yes,
ago. I
right.
mean, yeah, like we've all heard it at this point. Obviously, it doesn't sound like the Cubs are going to be able to spend money. Tom Ricketts is kind of giving them their budget, and they're pretty much at it. Is essentially what the idea behind this whole thing is here. So obviously, even though the Cubs are going into the season with guys like Brandon Kinsler and Brian Dunsing likely making this roster, have a really good chance to do that. Craig Kimbrel still a free agent and looks like he's going to go sign with the team that probably has the best chance to unseat them in the division once again, the Brewers. That bullpen tore apart the Cubs. I can't imagine what it would look like with Kimbrel as their closer.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so Jeremy Jeffress is injured and he's not going to be on the opening day roster. Corey Knebel, they haven't made an official announcement about his health status and whether he'll be on the opening day roster or not, but he hasn't pitched in a few days. The question, it's up in the air right now. Their bullpen's taken, take two of the three major pieces out of it to start the season. And, if a team like the Cubs gets off to a great start, or more likely, probably a team like the Cardinals gets off to a great start, you could be looking at a deficit in April before you even get your guys healthy again. Never mind the fact that, once Jeffress and Knebel are ready, they probably need to do a little bit more than just show up and start pitching in major league games. So if those guys aren't on the opening day roster, we're talking a couple weeks at least before they're ready to actually be major contributors. By then the Brewers could be 4 or 5 games back. So that's big for them. If they're going to go out and get a guy like Kimbrel, he could help them a lot. The problem is the Cubs are in pretty much exactly the same situation, except they don't have a dominant bullpen like the Brewers do when healthy. They've got Pedro Strop, who may be on the opening day roster. They've got Brandon Morrow, who is injured and won't be on the opening day roster, but could be not too far behind. I know he's thrown 25 fastballs recently off the mound and felt good, but we've heard before that he felt good and was ready to come back soon, and then it didn't happen. So right now the Cubs have Steve Cishek, they have Carl Edwards. Those are kind of the two guys you're relying on. There are some questions on both those guys. Cishek, it's the usage issue from last year. Edwards, it's the constant greatness followed by stretches of complete unusability. So outside of that, there isn't a whole lot that's reliable or even that good in the Cubs bullpen. Uh, if they're really going to go for it and try and win this year, which they say they are, they need to go out and be able to get a guy like Kimbrel, and they just are sitting there crying poor, and it's really sad.
It really is because there's no reason, there's nothing you can say like the offensive, like the reasons to not go after Bryce Harper, the Manny Machados, whatever. You can at least kind of see the thought process behind it because the Cubs do have some really solid position players, a lot of young guys with upside. It could develop into something special, and their bullpen, they don't. The Cubs' lack of pitching and lack of development in pitching, for that matter, just hasn't been there. It's something that's been well documented pretty much since the Epstein's gotten to Chicago. The Cubs have been unable to get some of these younger guys up and ready to go. Now, they have had a few success stories here and there. I mean, CJ Edwards has worked out great. They've found moments of success and kind of lightning the bottle with some of the relievers. But when it comes down to it, Craig Kimbrel elevates this bullpen to the level the Cubs probably need it to be. And without Kimbrel, you're really kind of rolling the dice on some guys is really what's going on. A guy like Brandon Morrow, who looked good in the first half and was excellent in the postseason and excellent for the Dodgers the year before that, was great. But I mean, that was like his one lone healthy season in how many, injury checkered seasons before that? I mean, the guy was a starter
Right.
for the Blue Jays at one point. You don't really have a lot of guys you really feel confident outside of maybe Pedro Strop. And now that he's been hurt a little bit, you're still kind of wondering, is this a guy we can lean on as much as we did? I mean, he's going to be 34 years old this year. So it makes too much sense for the Cubs to have Kimbrel, but for them to sit there and not spend the money, it's hard to swallow because it's a massive upgrade that the Cubs absolutely need to address. And the bullpen was an issue that you and I talked about a ton coming into this offseason. You thought the Cubs really need to address. And, Brad Brock is nice, and there's pieces they've added that could be there. Dylan Maples is a guy that everyone's going to at some point talk about, but you're not quite sure. Dakota Meckes. There's some options younger, that are in the minor leagues, but there's no one there that you can really look at and be like, he's a plug and play ready to go. So the Cubs do find themselves in a situation like you were talking about the Brewers, where they're down 3, 4, 5 games. Their bullpen isn't going to be able to help them. They're going to have to mash and really score a lot of runs and hope their pitching staff can hold it together. And you're just asking a lot with a ton of what ifs surrounded by it. So it's frustrating because Kimbrel solves a lot of problems that the Cubs seem to want to pretend aren't there.
Yeah, and it's impossible to know exactly how much money they actually do have. I think anybody who's convinced that they're telling you the straight truth that they just don't have any money, come on, that's
Right.
absolutely not true. And honestly, I mean, people look at it in the factor of like, okay, so the Ricketts are billionaires, obviously they have money. From their point of view, they look at it as, well, the Cubs are one of their assets that is self-sustaining. And they only spend money for the Cubs that the Cubs generate, and so they have these budgets set out based on how much money they generate year to year, and their budget is set, and they've kind of reached the point where they can't go beyond that budget line. It doesn't mean that there isn't other money hiding around. It doesn't mean there isn't money they could throw into their investment with the Cubs, to move it forward. There are other ways of doing this to help the Cubs win now where they could borrow against their own asset, essentially, to use more financial terms. So I just don't buy that there is no money or no way to make that kind of thing happen. It's sad. I don't know where this all went off the rails, you know? Like I don't
Right.
know where everybody in turned into, everybody empty your pockets.
That's a great way to put it. And it's strange because, I mean, the Cubs have never had an issue spending money. I'm sure last year getting burned a little bit probably changed the tone a little bit for the Cubs. I mean, obviously they spent some money that doesn't look reckless by any means, but maybe, I mean, obviously with the money Tyler Chatwood got last year, I don't think anyone would give him anything close to that. And I don't think they give pitchers in the same market that same type of like player type as Chatwood, that type of money right now. So it's interesting. But that being said, I mean, where did this come from? Where did they all of a sudden just have the funds, the lack of funds to be able to go out and get these guys? And just the way this offseason was debuted and billed as like the kind of the Cubs going in and getting Bryce Harper, going in after the Manny Machados or whatever. And even just Craig Kimbrel should have been someone he thought that should have been a no-brainer at this point. So it's tough, but if that's what they're going to set it and do, I mean, it really comes down to, like you were kind of saying here before, the Cubs ownership doesn't want to put any more money in because they're probably really close to the line where, if they put more money into us, they're not guaranteed that money back. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it, it's just sad because this never seemed like something that would ever be an issue for the Ricketts, who have always debuted themselves as like, Cubs fans through and through, people that want to see success. They want to see this team flourish. And right now they're kind of holding them back a little bit. And it's tough because there's a piece there sitting there still yet to sign that would solve a lot of problems that the Cubs just don't want to put the money towards. So if that's the
Right.
case, that's the case, sadly.
Yeah, and fair is fair. They're spending a lot of money on this roster, and that's not really our issue with it. We're not saying they're being cheap by any means.
Of course.
It's the most money spent on the team on the payroll in franchise history, but really it's about being able to make upgrades. We know they have the money to be able to do it. We know that these people have the money they can either take out of their pockets and put into it, or shuffle around within their own asset to be able to make it work, and they're just not willing to do it for whatever reason. So let us know what you guys think about it. Are you really angry that the Cubs aren't going out and trying to undercut the Brewers? So is this like the first time in team, recent team history that a team like the Brewers has been able to undercut the Cubs on a free agent. Let us know what you think. Go click that subscribe button if you like this kind of content, and we'll keep putting it out for you. We'll talk to you again next time.